We all love different styles and techniques, but I think one thing we all have in common is our love of learning and wanting to improve our skills, whatever level we're at right now. In a couple of weeks, the Card Making Success Summit will be taking place. There are more than 25 amazing speakers who can give you even more ideas for making your cards better. I'm one of the speakers, along with some of my crafty friends and some people that are new to me as well. I'll be teaching you techniques for watercoloring with the ink pads you already have. The summit is free and it's running from February 17th to the 20th. I've put a link down below in the description so you can get more information and decide if you'd like to join us. In the meantime, here's a few quick ways you can make your cards better today. First, let's take a look at basic card making construction skills. I'm talking about using good quality supplies, cutting straight lines, getting good stamped impressions, no visible smudges, and putting panels on straight and centered with no glue visible through the panels or squishing out the sides. You can have the most beautiful techniques, but if the card is put together carelessly or if things are crooked, it's going to distract from all your hard work. These are basic things that we all struggle with from time to time, and that's a good place to start. But what else can we do? I started by making this card with another stamp and die set from my unused pile. I've used the sentiment a lot, but again, as much as I love these roses, they've intimidated me because I actually have to arrange them. And like last week, I started by making a very simple card. I stamped 2 roses, some leaves, and the sentiment. I used the matching stencil and some Catherine Pooler inks to color it in, 1 color per shape. And this card is well made, it's clean, it's simple, and it's beautiful in its own way. I've left the stamps in my MISTI because I'm going to use the same idea and just change 1 or 2 things at a time to show you how you can add just a little something and take a simple card to the next level. The first thing I changed was how I added color to the flowers. This time I'm going to use 2 colors on each image and blend them. I'm putting Tiki Torch in the flower centers, and I know that just adding a bit of blending will give me a little more interest and maybe even some more sophistication. Once the Tiki Torch is in the center, it's time for the party dress on the edges. Now these almost circular shapes can be scary because you wonder how to line them up, but there are actually slight bumps in the stamp design and the stencil, and once you get those lined up, it's very easy. I'm using finger daubers because the areas are quite small, and it will make it easier to keep the ink where I want it, and not in the other areas of the stencil or off the edges. Next, I lined up the stencil over the leaves and I added lime Rickey and then a bit of Aquatini over each set. Now, I like the almost pop art feel of the first card, but I think this color blending adds so much more interest and a dimensional look. And this one could be done right here. It's perfectly pretty. But another way to elevate this design is to mask the flowers and leaves and add some background interest. This stencil comes with the cutout pieces so you can use them as masks, if you can find them. I seem to have lost one of the leaf masks, so I went old school and cut one from masking tape. Then I got out some Cummerbund ink and I blended it in circles from the center of the design. The double leaf mask kept moving, so in the end I just left it off because the leaves are blue and green already, so it won't hurt them to have some pale aqua on top. Another easy way to add a little more would have been to put the panel back into my MISTI and stamp with VersaFine Onyx ink and then heat emboss with clear embossing powder. But I didn't think of that at the time. I've got another panel that's been ink blended, and this time to add some more dimensional feel, I'm using gray Copic markers to create shadows. I like to start with the darker marker and draw fairly thin lines close to the bottom left edges of the images. Then I come back in with a lighter marker and I draw wider lines over top of the darker lines. This helps to blend the 2 lines together and keep the shadows looking darker closer to the flowers and leaves. And to take it one easy step further, I grabbed some markers that are a shade darker than my pink, yellow, and green shades, and I added some flicks of color in the little corners of the flower and leaf designs. Quick, easy little steps that don't require any coloring expertise can really add so much dimension to the design. Next, instead of leaving the panel a square, I'm cutting it with a circle die. The curved edges will echo the flowers and add some more interest. Well, it would if we could see it. To add some subtle definition to this design, I grabbed my black Copic marker and I used the chisel tip and ran it around the edge of the circle panel. You want to hold the nib at 90 degrees to the paper, or you may end up coloring on top of the panel rather than just right on that edge. You could do this with a gray marker or even the pink one. It's just a way to add a subtle frame and emphasize the fact that the focal panel is now a circle. And here's a less subtle way to do it. When you run the panel through your die cutting machine, before you take the die away, you can use a black marker to draw a frame. I'm using a Copic Multiliner, and I chose one that's kind of thick to try and match the line weight of the images and sentiment as well as I could. I actually like this one better. I felt like the previous one was a little too thin and didn't really fit with the rest of the design elements. Okay, next we're going to add some contrast by pulling in some black cardstock. To start, I'm going very traditional. Square white panel on top of square black panel, centered. Or you could do something unexpected and not center it. Put it in the top right corner. That's a fun look. One of the things I've been enjoying lately is adding a negative frame. You can do this with any nesting dies you have, but I have these Essential Squares die that cut a narrow frame, which makes it very easy. I cut the panel with this smaller square, and you could just use that with a thicker contrasting frame, or I like to glue the two pieces back onto the black cardstock, and that gives me a double frame. Another easy idea for changing the layout is to trim the focal panel so that it's as long as your mat, but narrower, and just have that contrast on either side. To add some more interest to those edges, I grabbed my stickles and ran a bead along the left and right edges of my white panel. Then I used my finger to just kind of pat them down and spread them out. This gives a little more organic look to the sparkle. We've talked about adding faux dimension, but of course you can also add real dimension. I popped this panel up on the black background, and this will draw even more attention to those sparkly edges. Now let's add even more dimension. This time I used the matching dies to die cut the colored flowers and leaves, and that will give me more options for layout and dimension. Even if I want to build a similar card, I can move the pieces closer together or further apart, whatever I want. And I can add some dimension to the white background panel with this angled mosaic embossing folder from Altenew. This will give a subtle geometric feel, and those angles will contrast with the round organic feel of the roses. My sandwich for 3D embossing folders like this is 2 Sizzix cutting plates. These plates are slightly thinner than the Gemini Junior plates that I use for die cutting, and having these in my collection gives me more options if I'm building different sandwiches for different purposes. There are other ways to create interest on your background. You could add score lines or some clear embossing with a background stamp. For my sentiment, I'm going to add some contrast with a black sentiment strip and white embossing. I lined up the stamp over my cardstock scrap in my MISTI, used some anti-static powder on it, and then inked up the stamp a couple of times with my Wow embossing ink. I poured the white powder over it, and then I heated it up in my foil-lined shoebox lid until it was all melted and smooth. To add a bit more interest, I added stickles to the edges of the sentiment strip. This time I didn't flatten them, I just left them right on the edge. On black cardstock, the glitter will give this panel some sparkly definition. Color blends, faux dimension, real dimension, definition, these are all ways to take a simple design to the next level. And of course, there's always a lot more for us to learn. I hope you'll join me and these other amazing crafters at the Cardmaker Success Summit later in February. The link is below in the description. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.